Welcome back to Highway Through Health. We're not a crisis line, we're not a therapy show, and we're not licensed healthcare providers. What we are is a place where lived experience is taken seriously because too many people have discovered the more clearly they speak, the worse they're treated. We share personal experience not to give medical advice, but so that when people encounter the kinds of situations we discuss, they're ready to recognize patterns and respond effectively. This show is about language, power, and what happens when systems stop listening and start translating people into problems. If you've ever felt misheard, mislabeled, or punished for staying coherent under pressure, you're in the right place.
If that's part of my point and purpose and going through what I've gone through to be able to, as an autistic woman who had already suffered trauma and was already well aware of that, to be able to have had in some ways the gift of dissociation because I was able to keep part of myself very pure in a way of being able to note take. And had I not gone through some of the things I did in early childhood, I may not have had enough of a developed ability to do that, let's say, coupled
Mhm.
with the autism that has given
Right.
me the ability to go backtrack and sort of like, note take in spite of what they tried to do to me, in spite of the ECT, in spite of the repeated attempts at neurotoxic drugging. Um, I still retain the information and I'm grateful. If that helps save
Right.
other people, then thank you God for giving me that opportunity because I know how much it matters.
Absolutely. And I think, really what we're saying is everything that we're talking about is biblically consistent. So
Yes.
for today, you can look at Hebrews, right? Fear of death is bondage to sin. There's a whole bunch of, go read Hebrews. It's very enlightening. Romans, Paul's talking about using being a slave to righteousness to break up those patterns that we were talking about, where all this, chaos stays normalized. And he's like, the best way to undo that is to be a slave to righteousness, and then you break that. And then in James, they talk about let yes be yes and no be no. And what is that? That really gets back to what we were saying about the lack of bargaining. It's like I'm not here to bargain. This is the way it is. And you know, the that's another vital part of the practice, I think, is you have to get to the point where your emotions don't waver and you don't bargain. This is the way it is. I know it. I'm keeping that close to me. I'm going to use it and it's going to
Yeah.
carry me through a whole bunch. And it really does. So today,
Yes, it
really,
does.
we talk about fear of death, but it's when I look at society, I don't necessarily think people are talking about fear of death being their physical mortality because everybody thinks everybody's going to heaven and got a little shortcoming in knowledge there. But anyway,
Yeah.
when you're really getting over this and you look at what are people afraid of, they're really more afraid of exposure. They're afraid of, status loss. They could be afraid of
Yes.
being wrong. They can lose authority. Fear of losing narrative control is a huge one in society today, where a lot of the stigma comes out to derail people talking about things that are just not, you know, Epstein is an example, but boy, there are a whole bunch more of those. So really, in our society, modern death is exposure. And really, when you look at somebody who's in bondage, if I see somebody, get into narrative protection, then I know, you got some problems going on because you've lost discernment, your feedback mechanisms are disconnected, and it's indicative of a whole bunch of problems. So, and those kinds of mechanics take a hold of people, then that distortion gets in there and it starts doing its thing, adding chaos, making people feel unsafe with themselves in some cases, where they really can't function. I can't tell you how many people I hear too much chaos, too much um, panic attacks, a number of other things that hit them that really comes out of that inability to wipe out the chaos at a real core level. And I think
Yeah.
that they like that stigma. by making fun of the religious or spiritual aspects of how these principles work, because I do feel that there are natural principles that we can employ to our benefit, which is what we're trying to
Yeah,
say, and that you don't really need to pay somebody to do it. It's more of a matter of
right.
getting out and practicing it, and you'll
Yeah,
be ahead of the game. Now, the question is, how do we get rid of all this stigma? How do we keep from getting hauled into courtrooms and ridiculed? And how do we get ridicule of religious language out of courtrooms? Because the psych industry has apparently turned our, probate court system across the country into what's little more than a facilitator for organized crime, as far as like white collar crime.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I definitely agree. Um, it really is about us being able to reclaim our own narratives. It is about us being able to talk about the miracles we've experienced. It's about making people realize that miracles aren't just from back in Jesus's time. These things have continued to happen. Every once in a while, you'll hear about something that'll make the news that's miraculous. And people do need to think too, these folks, these corporations who are running the news, they have a real vested interest. Not only are they enslaved to Big Pharma at this point, I mean, I think it's something like it's an absurd amount of advertising dollars that come from it. Like I think 93 to 95%.
Wow.
Yeah, it really is quite outsized. So they have already are being disincentivized to report on things such as what we're talking about.
Right.
There's a lot of people who really want to keep that gravy train going, and there's a lot who like the false narratives, not just for the profiteering, but because they are afraid of ego death. And kind of what goes back to what you were saying, people aren't afraid of physical death, but of ego death. They're afraid of the death of their excuses because so
Right.
many people like their excuses to misbehave, to mistreat people and everything. Oh, I couldn't help. Yes, you could. Yes, you could. You made a choice
Right.
to do that. You know better than to do that. I don't want to hear
Hmm.
that. I'm tired of hearing people's excuses. No, you need to own up to what you do and then
Right.
make changes. Hold yourself accountable, hold yourself responsible, start making changes. You know when you're hurting other people, you know when you're hurting other creatures. Stop it. It's no
Yeah,
excuse for it.
yeah,
I
you
get
have to.
tired of hearing that, you
Yeah, I do
know?
too. You really have to tune out to not know that you're doing things damaging. And especially, when I was locked up,
Yeah,
I'm repeatedly telling them to leave me alone. They won't do it. You cut your painkillers back. Like, let's pile up everything we can to make you unstable, make you
right.
uncomfortable, so we can pathologize you even more and keep you here even longer,
Yes.
even though it's clearly not doing me any good. But these institutions have got this little stigma system going that makes sure that people stay in their little orbit. And, they will. When you start using experiential or religious language, what you're doing at that point is threatening narrative control. And here comes the stigma. Let's deploy it. Mockery, that's part of it. Pathologizing things, that's another part of it. I mean, I was seriously mocked in courtroom. It was absolutely ridiculous. Making caricatures of people's lives is another thing that's very common. That was also done. And, this is not about testing truth. This is not about helping people. This is about, you know, the more that you can interrupt someone's ability to articulate what we're talking about, then fear wins. And that's what I appreciate what we're doing is we're trying our best to articulate things that are very difficult to articulate,
Yeah.
but they are consistent. We're trying to bring out the non-metaphysical, non-magic part of this, the things that actually
Yeah.
work and the things that you can actually feel. And so
Right.
really, when we talk about what we're doing, and it really aligns quite well with the neuroplasticity alignment, right? Because if you train
Absolutely.
yourself to do things, then your brain kind of repackages itself. So when we're sitting here saying radical honesty is part of it, a non-victim attitude is another huge piece of the pie. The things that the spiritual, the acknowledging of where my emotions come from, where, and knowing that you can, like Paul did, use these
Yes.
principles to your advantage to bring yourself more peace. You will be confronting people more. You will start confronting evil because that's what he's saying, being a slave to righteousness.
Mhm.
That's what you're doing. And that's what they
Right.
don't like us doing. that's where a lot of the stigma, I think, is directed at. They want to make it comfortable for people to be systemic liars and just
Yeah,
say, well, this everything's a debate, which it
yeah.
isn't.
They want to provide a safe haven for evil. There's no other way around it. They want to really swim in a cesspool of materialism. They want this unearned control. They worship money. They want this supposed status, and it's just really silly. It's not based on anything, it's not based on anything real. It may be
Right.
based upon things that are somewhat tangible, but that doesn't make it any more real.
Exactly.
It's really quite silly. I There was this morning I listened to a radio program called Hebrew in the Morning, and I love it. But they had a poll on there this morning, like, would you accept $10 million for 10 years off your life? And I was impressed that they had actually read my comment. Like I said, I love those guys. I listen to them all the time.
Mhm.
Because I've written in, I said, I value people and experiences far more than money. Money is just a stupid construct to me.
Right.
And that really is the truth. It is what is really real is something that you feel it yourself. It's your intuition, it's your relationship with the spiritual. It's that deep knowledge that we are all spirits having a human experience, and not the
Mhm.
other way around. And there are people from churches and everything who kind of want to disavow that because they want to put themselves in a position of power. They want to elevate themselves at the expense of each individual. And it's not supposed to be that way. We have to consider too, why is it that certain kings and certain other religious organizations wanted to cut things out of the Bible and leave that out? The Book of Enoch, the Gnostic Gospels, anything about women from the New Testament. It's not even sensible. They are only wanting to sort of have a mechanism of control.
Mhm.
Over women, yes, but over a lot of other people, it's they don't want that ability for that one-on-one relationship with God.
I
I
agree.
can even remember my ex getting upset when I was saying something about Jesus. He's like, "What? You think you're Jesus now?" I said, "No, I never said that. I said we are all called to be like Jesus. We are all called individually to do that." Well, of course, he was furious about that. And just like when I told him, I hope you enjoy your 30 pieces of silver, and he starts slamming stuff all around. I said, well, I knew I kind of had an idea what my situation was at that point. So I thought,
Right.
it is what it is. I didn't realize how deeply he laid a trap, and I didn't realize uh, to the extent at that time what that professional so-called treatment team, because they're criminals. They operate in several states. They're a little team of criminals. And they've
Mhm.
been operating in several states under a corrupt little corporate entity called Sontag.
Yeah,
And
I
they,
mean, we,
yeah,
we can't stress how this is easy money. This is very easy money.
right.
You grab a disabled person, you haul them into the courtroom, you make fun of
That's
them, you
it.
shove them on Risperdal, you make a victim out of them, you
That's
keep
it.
them in this rotating thing that never goes away. You don't care how much damage is done to them. They have PSSD, so what? They have
Right.
all the other things that come out of this, including, the in, inability to sit still. People describe that as absolute torture as a side effect of a
Oh, it is.
medication. And we have been, how many years has it taken us to finally get to the point where they're starting to admit even that there's problems with the medications that they've been throwing out? And in the meantime, this stigma stays intact. This stigma has gone nowhere, and this stigma is generating lots and lots of dollars. But
Oh,
when we're
yes.
talking about disciplined truth telling, a lot of the things we're doing, for people to understand, it really reprograms how you think at a core level that is difficult to describe to people. And I can go through biblically and show where all that stuff is in there, but if you don't understand the functionality that they're trying to impart by the messages and the teachings that they're telling people, I think people just fall short and it doesn't make sense and it gets hard to read. And you're thinking, what is this? In my experience, even though it was biblically fundamentalist, it was not female disempowerment. It was an
Right.
equivalence. on the other side in heaven, it was you, me, and that guy over there. There wasn't like this big hierarchy. The people, there were just different people who had different experiences and they would communicate,
Right,
right? And that's kind of
right.
what it was. It wasn't a, there was nothing big about it except that deception was absolutely destroyed, just like in Acts 5. This was a place where you lie, you die. And you got to get that out of there. And when you start taking that attitude towards it and you look at, well, wait a minute, do I really have to be that aggressive about it? Well, that's what taught me. How aggressive is this? It's,
Yeah,
yeah, you do have to be that aggressive about it. You do.
yeah. Yeah,
And
you
then,
have to, yeah, you have to at least be able to draw clear and strong boundaries. You have to have
Mhm.
that assertiveness and stand up for yourself. And when I think about how psychiatry, again, you have that misuse, like when they would say slaves who wanted to run away had a condition called drapetomania,
right,
and then for years they wanted to say that homosexuals were disordered, and it's like,
right.
no, this is, you can't do this. There has been just this continuous misuse of,
Hmm.
oh, we know better, da, da, da. No, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Don't
And that
tell
we
me
don't do
that.
that anymore is garbage. Yes,
Yeah,
they still do that. It's still going on.
yeah, and this is all happening to the elderly, to foster children, to
Yes.
anybody who reports different kinds of crimes like I did.
Mhm.
And not even realizing at the time, or not even putting two and two together, I'd already had deed theft happen, or that I was essentially sold into research. I mean, that just never would have occurred to me. It never would have occurred to me certain things that I knew didn't add up with my ex, who was apparently paid to be a minder, or as he called himself one time, I'm the observer. I'm like, fuck you, observe this. I
Yep.
just had run out of
Yeah.
patience at a point, and all I wanted to do was leave. Part of what was, and then he had even rigged my cat's cage and all. It would be too much to get into, and it's very, very, very distressing to me.
It is.
But it was very methodical what happened. I knew it was being studied. I knew it was being researched. And that's distressing. And even when I've, have spoken with lawyers just to the regard of getting my making sure my medical records are corrected. But I knew too Hopkins was in trouble. So I know it's like a lot going on right now as far as this investigation goes. Like I say, it's far more than just me. I know now
Mhm.
why they were calling me a target and a linchpin. I get that now. I wouldn't have necessarily assumed that. That's only in my sort of backtracking and trying to, just regain my own agency, regain my own power and control, and saying, okay, what can I do now that I'm away from that? But I mean, they had it set up so that I lost everything I ever owned. How is that not directly linked to how Nazis did?
Oh,
It
right.
definitely is.
It's
It
the
is.
impoverishment is power. It's like having control over your pain
Mhm.
medication. If you can control somebody's
Yes.
pain, you can control them. So I see a lot of
Yeah.
this, the pain management thing is more of a control issue as well than it is an actual, let's help this person out. So,
Yeah.
but what we're talking about, even though cognitive behavior therapy talks about things that we're talking about, with the behavioral alignment and the value-based actions and the fear extinguishing and all that. So what we're saying, look at that, look at the other things that are running around, and just realize there's biblical principles that really are the exact same thing, and actually far more effective than what a lot of these people are doing, because a lot of these people are doing are
Yeah.
preserving their income streams and
Yes.
preserving, the same kind of stigma that we've been victimized by.
Yeah, the blame the victim thing, because they're not wanting to hold the abusers accountable. I mean, forcing me to live with a known abuser, again, me not necessarily cognizing all the way through that he was being paid too, that they were in collusion.
Hmm.
Um, but just the fact that they would even do that, I mean, it's not even sensible. So it's like, oh, and then sometimes when I would tell people, they're like, well, then that's partially your fault. I'm like, how the fuck is it my fault that he's abusing me? It
Right,
doesn't make sense. I even had friends that say, what did you do to make him hit you? What the hell are you talking about? That's
right.
not normal. And why aren't
Mm-mm.
you sticking up for me, who you've known for years? you know what I mean? It's just not even sensible. And some of these, these drugs and all this, a lot of times these drugs are known in trafficking circles as handler drugs. They're
Mhm.
forcing people, they're giving the elderly people in nursing homes phony diagnoses to get away with abuse and to get away with pumping them full of these poisons that they know are going to kill them quite quickly. And again, and having been a caregiver for my elderly adopted mother, I mean, had I known at the time, I mean, I knew she was on a lot of medications, but had I known, including Vioxx, and it ate through literally her intestines, she had to have mesh put in. Now, this poor woman was already really sick. I didn't, how do you even know all this? And none of that came out. And of course, they had taken
Mhm.
it off the market, but the things I found out since have horrified me. And they had her on Zoloft and other things that were really intensifying parts of her personality that I know she maybe found a little difficult to live with. They were using her basically as a toxic dumping ground, and it
Mhm.
just breaks my heart. And had I known then, and then they were doing the same thing to me, with all these, just carpet bombing me with all these useless psych drugs, these neurotoxins. And I'm like, this is just making a toxic situation. It doesn't need to be that way. And had I known
Mhm.
then what I know now, I could have advocated quite differently for her. I don't, there was a lot of damage that was already done between the Vioxx and the Fen and other things. Um, again, hindsight being 2020, you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Mhm.
But she could have had perhaps a much more comfortable last few years. The COPD may not have been able to be helped, but certainly some of the things that were given to her were probably either contraindicated or just absolutely deleterious.
Right.
It and it bothers me that this kind of thing is still going on with other people. I don't ever want anybody to kind of go through any of the things I have in any way, whether it was done directly to me or the things I saw indirectly.
Yeah.
Because I'm just horrified. I'm
I mean,
I'm
we're not
completely.
talking about, the mechanisms that we're talking about are the same. What the problem we have is that who's is trying to assume interpretive authority over these mechanisms, and are they going to be allowed to, the psych industry has decided that it has assumed interpretive authority. They've shopped the chemical imbalance theory through the courtroom. So basically, they use that kind of stigma in courtrooms to attack this and keep their revenue streams going. And we couldn't say no. This is not a situation where you're allowed to say no. I did say no. I said no a million times, and that seemed to really only thing that seemed to do was make them more determined to stick with the drugging, push through this quite fraudulent process that, and this notion that I'm being stabilized when I was not being stabilized. I was eventually pushed into a very severe health crisis, which then they engage in diagnostic escalation instead of addressing the fact that you put me into a health crisis. No, they didn't even want to admit that. So
Yeah.
it's you know, so when we can talk about these things and we frame them, they get framed clinically, then they're reimbursable. But when we frame it biblically, then it gets stigmatized. So same mechanisms, two stigmas, depending on which language you're using. One is conducive to selling drugs, the other one is not conducive to selling
Right.
drugs. So, where is it coming from? And who's doing it?
Yeah. It's
So,
it's the fact that they want to sell all these drugs. It really is because I knew that years ago when I gotten off of them and was doing so much better. Now, granted, what I didn't really put together all the way at the time was the fact that they had been refusing to treat my heart issues. They had been refusing to treat my pain issues. They had been refusing to treat my nerve damage. They had been refusing to treat my lupus. Now again, to some degree, I think because that even made me more determined to seek out like some of the natural cures and things like my dad had talked about. Um, so I think that made me more healthy in the long run, without question. But their refusal to treat anything but mislabel me, and again, deliberately mislabel my autism, deliberately mislabel the CPTSD, at least for a while. Um, that is eugenics. And I had
Yes.
already known that the way Hopkins was pushing for me getting my tubes tied, for example, I thought, gee, this smacks of eugenics. Not
Yeah.
necessarily considering the rest of it being tied in with that. I know better now,
Yeah.
which is why, again, I definitely speak up about it and I don't mince words.
So
Um,
exactly. I mean, the stigma, it's
yeah,
scary because it's you know what they're doing with it is reframing you as somehow being unstable, and when you're not. It's their
yeah,
refusal to have legitimate dialogue. I mean,
right,
I was held for 3 days, so I decided, okay, they're probably working on misinformation. So I wrote a 7-page paper, and that's the one I actually fed the paper into Chat GPT, and I fed the court transcripts into Chat GPT. And they said, "What do you think?" And it basically said it came back, and it was a Chat GPT said he lied. And I completely agree because it was such a significant mischaracterization that had absolutely no bearing on reality. Yet, boom, here comes the rubber stamp, and you're done.
right,
So that kind of stigma
yeah,
does that. And they shift the burden of proof onto the person who's speaking, right? And we can't prove it. And so really it comes back and says, why don't you just shut up and stay quiet? Because that's really what they're wanting to do. It's be quiet, don't challenge our narrative. This is how we make money. I don't really care what's happening to you seriously because you're using religious language and you use religious language that attacks our power structure and it attacks our ability to shove pills down your
yes,
throat or inject them into you or whatever other
hmm,
kind of toxic thing that they want to engage in. So it's we've tried and tried and tried to get attention to this, but at the end of the day, you'd thought we would have learned this, but courts are not meant to adjudicate theology. They're not. And
right.
psych is not even theology. It's got less factual things about it than the Bible does, the theology does
It's
there.
a cult.
It is. I agree. I
It is.
completely agree.
Scientology has more going for it than psych ever will, because Scientology doesn't drag you out of your house under false pretenses, shove you in the back of a cop car, and force you to go to Scientology.
Right.
They don't hold you captive for this and that.
Mm-mm.
So truthfully, psych is a cult and it's a dangerous one. And it's a waste of taxpayer money. Taxpayers shouldn't be forced to fund this cruelty, and it is.
Right.
It's cruelty. It
Because it's
it, it
very clear.
is.
Hmm
Yeah, it's stripping people of their human rights, their constitutional rights, their right to bodily autonomy, their Fourth Amendment rights. It's disgusting. It's
Speaking as
absolutely disgusting.
It is. Speak in a certain way or you'll lose authority or lose standing. And what happens really is when you lose that standing within a medical thing like that, you don't get over it. It doesn't go away. My experience was that stuck with me. At that point, from that point forward, I could not have a legitimate conversation with a healthcare professional because I knew,
Right.
first of all, what these people are capable of doing, what they will do, what they'll do without
Mm-hmm.
hesitation, what they will never apologize for and how they're really all about protecting their narratives and protecting, you know, whatever they can do to suppress the feedback loop that we're talking about here and say that, oh, that's not that doesn't work. It's only these drugs that work, which is absolutely crazy. Because, when
Right.
we're talking about you get this experience and then you articulate that experience and then you have to go through the testing and then you go through the integration of all that. The stigma gets in the way of that because they want you to think that you're crazy for even going through the steps of trying to do that. So the more that they can mock your articulation, make fun of it, they'll do it. And that directly contributes to your loss of civil rights. You will be forcibly drugged. Anywhere that they can abuse you and get away with it, that will happen to you. That's the problem with our
Yeah.
system today.
Yeah. And here I am. I can walk, and I was glad when I had gotten back when I was in the shelter and had gotten a thing from Social Security, wanting I don't know. It was something or another. They were going to put me up for review or whatnot for disability. Well, I sat down and wrote him a 10-page letter. And I told them everything that was going on because I had already tried to report all this. I'd been trying to report like members of the team to proper authorities back in Maryland prior to that going on,
Hmm.
and even prior to the ECT, I might add. Um, and a number of other things, realizing that there was an element of, let's just say, religion and studying reincarnation to what was going on with me. I realized at some point that they had misused past life regression hypnotherapy on me just to see what would happen. Even my ex had admitted that at a point. Um, and to leave me at sixes and sevens, so it wasn't properly followed up because they just, they wanted their little narrative because they were purposely abusing me.
Hmm.
They were using me as a human experiment. There is no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to mince words on this. This is what they were doing to me. But I was
Well,
glad that I had that opportunity to write them that letter, to be in touch with Maryland State. They knew somebody had to know what was going on. They knew MBA people were stealing identities. They knew that these team members were convicted in, or at least had, I don't know what you call it in other states. Um, so they knew. They knew. There's
mhm.
just they knew. Um,
Right.
and they thought they were being cute or funny or whatever. Well, not so much.
No.
Um, and that's why, the fear, the death of fear, absolutely, because I'm more like, was at a point where it's like, here I am, come speak to me. I said the same
Right.
thing to the FBI because I was trying to report to the FBI what was going on, even at that time, as
Yep.
far back as like 2021, 2022. And then I called them again recently within the past couple months, and let them know where I was. Um, and was talking about trafficking. Now all this about benefits trafficking is coming up in Maryland. I had no
Hmm.
problem calling investigative reporters. I had no problem calling anybody. And I'm like,
Right.
here's where I am. You can come see me. I can actually walk now. So dispute that, y'all. Dispute that. I can walk comfortably. I can,
Right.
go through and do chores. I don't need assistance anymore, and I never had a problem other than dealing with my trauma. And yeah, I'm autistic. That's not ever going to change. I have heart problems. That's not ever going to change.
Yep.
I have lupus, my symptoms are well under control, but it's still on my medical record. Yeah, I have it. It's not going to change.
No. No.
These are all things though that now are not I mean, I may still have them, but they're not affecting me nearly as much because I've been very proactive in things. And like I said, that was a miracle healing that I had. I never
Yeah.
thought I'd be able to sit comfortably, let alone walk. Why would,
Same
you
with
know what
me.
I mean? People should celebrate that. I mean, my
Should.
God, they should celebrate that fact instead
I
of attempting to sabotage it. But that's the kind of cruelty and evil that we're talking about, that these folks and Big Harma and these other folks, they need to be prosecuted under RICO statutes
they
as well
do.
as torture, trafficking, and other things, because this is just, all these things that they're doing. Well care, for example, that's what they were falsely Baker acting people in Florida. It's the same shit that's going on in Maryland, because
Yeah.
Maryland, you're forced to deal with well care. You don't even get the choice.
Well, when
So
the
it's the
standards
same
are so
thing.
low, why not? And
Right,
you're not going to get in
right.
trouble. No one's going to look in on it. When you can, the language that was used against me was just flat out mocking Christianity, but that doesn't matter. Hey, that's the way we're going to run our courtrooms now, right? Because they don't
Right.
want you and I to articulate the kind of things that we're talking about because they want to stick these clinical narratives in, which manufacture billable events. They want to own the risk narrative to say if you're dangerous or not dangerous when that's a joke. They try
Yeah,
to
very.
all these narratives that they try to run for you, and you're like, well, you know, wait, these are people that have a 50%, if that, accuracy rating when it comes to diagnosis, yeah, I would make the argument that diagnosis is a completely fraudulent term of art, that it
Oh,
has
very.
no basis whatsoever being in here. And when
Yeah.
that word comes out of a psych practitioner's mouth, they need to get out of medicine. They really do,
Yep.
because there's nothing of certainty about anything they're saying. It's about selling drugs.
That's it. They want to cherry pick and skew information and do all this in order to sell drugs. That's
Right.
it. There's
They're a
nothing more
two-trick
to it than
pony.
that.
They've
Yep.
got drugs, pharma, and ECT. That's it. And so
That's
when you
it.
look at the whole plethora of things that you can do to help get yourself regrounded, get the confusion out of your life, get all the craziness out, get back into that peacefulness, get back into your walk with God, do all those types of things
Yep.
that really help you. None of that fits those business
Right.
models. And so
Yeah.
this coerciveness and the stigma is harmful to us because you get to the point where you can't even talk about it. And you got to be kidding because these are people that they don't have very good at all long-term outcome data. Their data when it comes to getting people off of addiction is horrific. They
Oh my
have
God, it gets
relapse
worse
rates
every
through the roof.
day.
Yeah, I mean there's nothing about what they're doing that's leaving the vast majority of people that they interact with better off than they were before they interacted with them. People come out of this with polypharmacy complications. You come out of it with all kinds of complications. And it's just it needs to be addressed. It's just too crazy right now.
Yeah, it's all getting exponentially worse, instead of better. And I just read, and I was absolutely, heartbroken, to see that Martin Short's daughter had died by suicide.
Right.
And she worked in the mental health field. And I thought to myself, and work trying to get, she was a licensed clinical social worker, and work trying to, get people into treatment and different things. And I thought to myself, my God, this poor, beautiful young woman was probably even afraid to speak up about her own feelings in a number of ways that she ended up doing that because
Right.
there isn't any actual help anymore. And I'm sure she had to know that working in the field. She probably thought to herself, my God, it's just going to end up getting me kidnapped and drugged.
Hmm.
This isn't going to be helpful. And I thought this just makes me all that much more determined, because yes, we've heard her story, and like I said, to me that's absolutely heartbreaking. I'm a huge Martin Short fan. I mean, I'm big on comedy and everything, and
Yep.
and just to see that, it just really broke my heart. And that poor man, Martin Short's been through some tragedies already and lost a number of people, including his wife to cancer.
Wow.
It's just devastating. And
That's
I
gotta
thought,
hurt.
oh my
Yeah.
God, yeah, unimaginably. And I thought, this just makes me even more determined to make sure that we have pure run warm lines, that we have soteria houses, that we're able to build up a network of other people who have either survived suicide attempts or at least the ideation, so that we can talk to one another. Because what we need is somebody who's been there, done that, and come out the other side.
Right.
Let's just be able to be there to hold space. You don't need drugs. You certainly don't need those kind of deleterious drugs. But what we do need is understanding. We need one another. We need that kindness, that understanding, that connection, that ability to reconnect to spirituality, and to build a bridge to walk from point A to point B. And I
Right.
just feel so devastated that that isn't already in place, that could have saved her life. That could have made all the difference. And it just makes me more determined that we not only speak out about these egregious abuses, because the suicide rate has gone up exponentially
Oh
since these
yeah.
drugs have been out. And they know they cause suicide. They know this. They know it. And when you're thinking about cruelly depleting somebody's dopamine, that's sick. This is why these are used as literally as torture drugs in other countries. That's what they're
Right.
used for.
Right. They
And
can.
these are the exact same chemical compounds, but they're marketing them here differently. And I'm horrified by that. And people do need to know. And that's why we have such an issue with this. And we have the economic contractures and other pressures, but to be blaming individuals for their understandable reactions to economic instability, to the loss of jobs, to other things, and then blaming it like it's a personal fault is so many bullshits that I can't even. They would reach the roof. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's astonishing, and it is really these false narratives that need to be addressed, and the fact that I think what we're doing is just beyond important to be able to give people a framework for these spiritual experiences. This is happening now to a number of people to have these spiritual experiences because of the things that other people are doing. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We've
Right.
had too many actions on that negative materialist side that's just amoral, and to me a degree of evil that can rarely even be put into words.
Right.
But it is a choice, and these people are amoral, and it is a satanic behavior. It is that type of thing. So that's why we are, a lot of us, having these spiritual awakenings. That's why we're seeing a lot of people with near death experiences being able to come back and articulate them, like I've had, like you've had, like so many other people have had. And I feel like it is extraordinarily important that we're able to put this into a context, to be able to give people an idea, to be able to help build a framework of things that actually work for people, to follow up with this in a way that allows for growth, that allows for larger community, that allows for an actual uh, I don't want to say counter programming, but in a way, a workable alternative that absolutely does not involve drugs, and in fact does involve deprescribing, that involves helping people get off of street drugs as well. The way that we need to look at addiction and trauma and
Mhm.
how that's interrelated, because it all comes out of trauma. People are not going to pick up something to numb themselves if they don't have something they want to escape from.
Right.
And I think that that is how things need to be looked at. That's how things need to be addressed. We need to be able to put that back into creativity and working things through that way, and building that sacred connection to creativity and that kind of relationship with spirituality. Um, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It's what keeps me stable. And, I don't think I should have to be, I shouldn't have to carry a lawyer around with me when I go to a doctor's appointment because someone wants to try and sell an antidepressant, which, when you look at the meta-analysis on those things, they really have little to no benefit over placebos. And when you look at the long-term recovery data in several of the different areas and illnesses, we're way behind. Schizophrenia over in other non-developed countries that don't rely on drugging tends to clear up in 10 years is what they're saying. But over here, you're guaranteed, but they keep you in your victim state, keep making fun of your spiritual aspects, then they're going to keep you in these in this drug state and a state of absolute torture for 40 years. That's fine with them. They don't have a problem with that. um, Talking to people who have told their doctor, I'm having side effects. This is definitely affecting me in a debilitating way. No, it's not. Just blow it off and just
yeah.
ignore you. So
Hmm.
it's really
We're gonna
this.
push other pills.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I got another
Hmm.
pill. If that one doesn't work, I got another one for you. And it doesn't
Yep.
matter when you tell them, no, leave me alone. I don't do that. It doesn't fit with me at all. They'll just blow you off. It doesn't matter. They'll
Yep.
use the courts as a bludgeon. They'll beat you with them. They'll threaten you. At that point, you're suspect every time you walk into a doctor's office. You can't say,
Hmm.
no, this is a theological thing because I'm called hyper-religious in a courtroom. So, and a number of other slurs that were pretty horrific when you get down to what we're really trying to talk about. That, and that happens in such a knee-jerk way, such a casual, oh, well, doesn't matter, we're going to do this to you anyway. Where did this come from? I really have to ask myself, where did these people, these ideas, and this kind of garbage come from, other than we're throwing way too much money at the wrong people?
Yeah, that has to be it. And I think too, like when we have people who are in entertainment, I'll name two women in particular, Anna, or should be known as Patty Duke. Um,
Hmm.
and and she even had written in her book about having had like a religious experience at one point because she kept praying to God, and this was even, I think, after she may have even been on the medication, because she was primarily taking lithium, and as you know, passed way too soon, but had a lot of trauma as
Hmm.
a child, quite a bit, and either way, just a lovely woman, just so full of spirit, so full of creativity. There was just no pathway given for her trauma other than the drugs. But she had even wanted God to like show himself, and he did. And she kind of wrote beautifully about that in her book, Call Me Anna. But I think she would have still been with us had it not been for the drugs. And the same thing with Carrie Fisher. God rest her soul. Again,
Right.
beautiful woman, had just gone through an awful lot. Trauma based, was trying to stop drinking, stop doing coke. All these things understandable, but was put on Prozac and died of heart problems. So, and they know that these things do affect like heart problems. And you talk about mind body coherence and how much the heart has like brain cells and things, and how sad her mother passed on, like I think 2 or 3 days after Carrie had passed. Um, and and I don't believe in coincidence.
Right.
It very much, these are two women who should have still been with us, and probably would have been had things been dealt with in a way that didn't involve those unnecessary drugs,
I,
but address the traumas in a very real and effective way.
I remember they shopped her around the talk shows. I think it was Mike Douglas I might have seen her on. And basically being an advertisement for the drug industry, these are help on and obviously it did not. But to come on and say that it's like, hey, we'll keep you relevant if you're coming in and do like a covert ad for us. But using social media and social things to further the chemical imbalance theory, for example, which is a huge problem. And I really wish they would pass that law that bans advertising from the pharmaceutical companies because
Rockwood.
too much unethical stuff is going on with this stuff. Because I mean,
Oh
if we're
yeah.
really talking about evidence-based medicine, you would think patient autonomy would matter. You would think
Right.
informed consent would matter. You would think open
Yes.
debate would matter. You would think
Right.
about something like transparent risk discussions could be held. They put me on something that shot my blood pressure through the roof, knowing full well I was on Coumadin, knowing full well I was on a blood thinner that put me at a high risk for a heart attack or stroke. And they pushed me into heart attack or stroke territory, and they acted like it was no big deal. We're not going to
Yeah,
take
I was already
responsibility
having
for that.
seizures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And there they were putting me on these drugs that right on the side effects can cause seizures. I'm like, what the hell y'all think you're doing? This isn't even
Right.
funny. This is not funny to me. And then to force me to have ECT, knowing I have heart problems on top of it,
Right.
and knowing that I made it crystal clear, I don't ever want this to happen to me. But they were torturing me. I
Hmm.
mean, once you do the kinds of things that have been done to me, and knowingly they were trafficking me, and it already stole my identity. I guess they figure, well, we'll do whatever the hell we want to her. Well, it's not
Right.
okay. It's not
Right.
okay.
No, it's not. And these institutional incentive structures that, really
Yeah.
are they're designed to disempower people. They're not there to build you up. They're not there to understand you. They're going to say, "Well, we're just here to stabilize you." Even though I don't have anything in my records that showed that I was unstable, what I have in my records is people listening to rumors, unhinged rumors that were not even close to describing what was really going on. But they've got this set up to where you're going to lose. You get kidnapped into one of these places, you're going to lose. That's why I didn't want to talk to him. I knew what had happened was outside the norm of every normal experiences. I had to process it. I had no intention of even attempting to process it while I was captured. And thank God I didn't, because I would have told them everything. I don't know that I ever would have gotten out of there. I mean, they're that predatory and
Yeah.
not because I needed to be there, but because they can make a lot of money off of keeping me there. And I don't think
That's
that I
it.
would have lived very long either under these people's care because they don't care about your blood pressure. They
No.
don't care about these things. They think there's a pill for everything and they'll just, if they got you taking 15, 20 drugs, that's okay with them. They don't care. And
Right.
to say you have to do this and don't have the right to say no, I still want to know where did this come from, especially when they have such a horrific attitude towards religious experience, experiential religious things that you literally can't talk about. If you're kidnapped and you talk, and if I would have talked about it, like I said, I would not be out. I wouldn't have gotten out of there. I know I wouldn't have. Because
Yeah.
afterwards, I did start writing about it on Quora quite extensively because that was about the only place that I could write about it. And it would have been nice, like we said a few sessions ago, that if we could have had a cooperative relationship with the physicians. But the problem was they're protecting the narrative They're protecting the institutions. They had no intention of having any kind of a discussion with me that didn't start with "you're crazy" or "and
Yeah.
you need to be on a drug." And so I'm not going to entertain that. Why am I going to humiliate myself like that? You want to have a legitimate conversation? I'll have a legitimate conversation, but it's going to be a legitimate conversation, not a one-sided, oh, we have you kidnapped and we're looking for a reason to drug you because we need to, create some more billable events. It's,
Right.
you know, let's have a real discussion. But we're not even at the point in the medical industry where you can do that yet. And that's a huge problem, especially when we're
Very.
forced to pay for it.
Yeah.
So, you know,
But waste of money and not small money either. It's not small potatoes. It's a lot of money that
we're,
they're, and that's why I say it's profiteering, and it
mhm,
really is. They really do need to be prosecuted under RICO statutes.
yeah,
That really is just fact. What this is criminal enterprise. It's
there,
fraud.
it's a $300 billion a year industry. That's
Right.
three times the amount of money collected by all churches, mosques, and synagogues in the United States. Think about that. They're getting three times that. They are hostile to religious expression. If you don't believe that, I have a court transcript and a paper that I wrote that will probably change your mind. And
Mhm.
when we're sitting here going, we're doing this slave to righteousness thing because what it does is it drives radical honesty. It causes we refuse to distort things. We don't sit around and negotiate on certain points like that. What's the problem here? All this
Right.
what we practice results in alignment under pressure. So when these big,
So,
massive emotions do come in, I admit I was not prepared for what I encountered when I first encountered it. I am now
yeah.
because I know that it's there.
Right.
And if you can
Right.
keep stigmatizing these discussions, then nobody knows it's there, do they? If I would have known that could have happened, it would have been a different experience than what I had. But, let's
That's it.
keep this stuff up. And so
Yeah.
we're saying let's get this bondage, this fear-driven distortion out of our healthcare, get it out of our lives. When I say no, it means no, because to us, freedom is disciplined alignment, period. And we do have a
Yeah.
creator. We're not questioning that. We don't have that question in our mind. I don't have the burden of doubt when it comes to that topic. So from that point, now I
Right.
need to be able to be free to use the facts that I know that are facts and put these things in motion like they're supposed to be done because that's what keeps me calm and in a decent mood. I have to put up with this, you know, from the minute I get up to the minute I go to bed. I don't wake up thinking,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to go out and, go plow the back 40 today. I know that I have limitations. But I don't sit up and take an inventory of limitations and say, what can't I do today? It's the opposite. It's what can I do today, even
Yeah.
though, you have these things and it really does require a lot of extra energy. And that framework is vital. If I'm not if I can acknowledge my inspiration comes from God that keeps me pushing through all this stuff, that's what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to say that in front of a doctor and not get kidnapped. And the way things stand today, you can't do that. You can't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And that's sad. I'd even mentioned to somebody just in applying for getting everything together with particular benefits and making sure people know I'm established at the address I'm at now and everything. And I'd spoken with the young lady and I said, listen, I said, I don't go to allopathic doctors anymore. I just don't. I don't go to anybody Rockefeller based. I said, I do everything on my own. I'm very proactive with my health. I'm very on board with MAHA. I really hope that
Mhm.
people will get away from these drugs. I said, I think it's necessary. I said, I found all this to be very deleterious to my health. And I explained that I'd been trafficked and everything. And,
Right.
she said, I'm very sorry that happened to you. I said, well, that's why, Maryland is under some quite heavy scrutiny right now, as well they should be. This is terrible. Um, but, I mean, that's just where I'm at with it. But I find in just being very open with what I've been through, I say it when I talk to people because I don't want them to be afraid. And I do want people
Right.
to realize this is very real. I'm not the only one who's been through it. And I want for other people who may have, God forbid, had to go through the same thing, because I know I'm not alone in this. I want for them to be able to have the courage to speak up and out.
Right.
I want them to realize there are other ways of handling your health, of deprescribing, of having that be, of healing, and having that be a real thing. And there are ways towards working toward that. And I would love to be able to have that as part of the common conversation, so that more people will be able to take that route themselves. I know that they wanted to, Timothy Leary and others have wanted to try and have that, Ram Dass, other people have
Mhm.
wanted to try and have that, and that conversation was shut down by COINTELPRO and by others, again, who have that profiteering bent, and that
Right.
control bent, and
It,
and that really is very, very sad.
it seems to me that the reason the two of the most toxic, modalities, the drugging or the ECT that have been forced into the courtrooms, really that has a whole lot more to do with social control and intimidation than it has to do
Very
with
much.
anything, you know, legitimately medicinal. So it
Yeah.
we we're kind of unloading here today, but believe me, we're unloading in a very cautious and measured way because I could unload a lot worse. But and I got 1,175 or so pages of records that I've gone through and looked at this stuff. And when you're dealing with these people who it just shocked me. I look at what I remember the kind of conversations I was having, then I look what was written in the medical records behind my back, and they're completely different things. And in some of cases, they were just completely fraudulent. I mean, there were things in there that never
Oh
even
yeah,
happened.
same here.
But we'll just chart that anyway
Yep.
because, we don't care. And everything is
Yep.
they have such low standards. It's those low standards that drive the high profitability. So keeping those low standards, keep making fun of experiential religious experiences, and, we can keep cashing in. And I think that's the dynamic.
Perjury.
It just has to stop. It's
Yeah.
been going on way
They
too
commit
long.
perjury for profit.
It is. It really is.
And it's mind-boggling that these folks are committing perjury for profit, but that's where we find ourselves. That's how criminal they are. That's the kind of uh criminality and level of fraud that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
And
well, you
and this
look.
should just not be going on.
Yeah, I mean, who practices medicine in a vacuum, right? Who does that? Who has somebody come in and then just completely disavow or delegitimize what they've been told? I've got documentations where I told the nurse I used to travel around the world as part of my job for business, and which I did. I've got, a passport with tons of stamps in it, and I lost one with even more stamps in it. So there's no problem proving that. But she writes in my notes, I don't think I believe him. So, you're going in here, you're going into these places. This isn't legitimate dialogue. This is dialogue
No.
that drives an outcome, and the outcome is a drugging that makes them a lot of money, makes you a victim, keeps you upset, keeps you in this state of confusion, and stigmatizes everything we talk about that helps people get out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, they can line their pockets with blood money. That's
Right.
that's really what it comes down to.
It does. So that's why we do that. That's one of the reasons why we do this, because we know that
Absolutely.
we know, I guess I would say I definitely know what other people are facing who are dealing with really powerful things going on. And then you get these kinds of people who step in and try and micromanage, reinterpret, or whatever that they have to do, use that stigma to take away your legitimacy and harm you. I mean, what they did to me harmed me
Yep.
economically. That wasn't enough that they did it just to me. Then they start calling up your family members. Then they start smearing you to your family members. So it doesn't stop with these people. They don't have a bottom. And it, how this is really going on still just boggles my mind that it is such
Well,
an easy thing to do.
I see cracks appearing in the facade, and that's where I see the light starting to shine through. And it's definitely where I think, as we've said before, we're a bit too many, but I really feel like by us talking about this, giving people a chance to hear our stories and recognize themselves in what it is that we say, For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and these folks have been doing what they've been doing for far too long.
Yep.
And I know that we're part of the exposure. I know that we're part of, what has been concealed will be revealed. And I
Yeah.
know that we're being part of that revelation. And that when people do talk about, we're in the end times of revelation, this is one of the things that's going to be revealed. This is one of the major revelations that's going to happen. I have no doubt about that, none at all.
Right.
Because God is coming back in each and every one of us. It's about each of us realizing that we're a piece of God, and each of us realizing that we play an important part, and the choices we make and what we do with our lives matter. And they
Hmm.
matter in a way that's very, very big and echoes throughout time, because we're all eternal energy. Energy
Right.
cannot be created or destroyed. And so therefore neither can we.
Right.
We're each temporarily in these bodies for however long that may be, but we have that right. We're sovereign beings. And I definitely believe that we are coming back to that, not only that realization, but having that turn of tide,
Right.
that a lot of these false constructs, they're already falling. I have no doubt that some of what's within these Epstein files is going to be revealed about this misuse of psychiatry and what it's about, and how it's just a false construct. And I have no doubt that that's going to be part of what's going to come out. And I definitely believe that's going to be part of where this whole false narrative falls, how that's
Yeah.
tied in with insider trading, how that's tied in with stock market.
Right.
Because a lot of people don't realize, yes, Epstein was a compromise dealer. He also had a lot of insider trading, had worked at Bear
Hmm.
Stearns, colluded with a lot of computer experts. So it's all of these things that are going to be, you know,
Right.
coming out and discussed in a big way. Yes, the salacious stuff that's horrible, the sex stuff that yes, that's terrible. I don't discount that. I'm a SA survivor myself. However, it's going to be all these other things that are really going to collapse the current
Right.
structure and system.
For me, I mean, I'm an engineer with an MBA. I would never have, the whole end times thing just seemed like it was a, what are you joking? When I would listen to people talk about that kind of stuff, once I had that experience, I was like, oh no, we got a time limit going on here. This is a
Yeah,
problem.
right,
And
right.
helping people understand that connectivity and dispelling the stigma that's associated with people who talk about it, that that's an emergency. See
Oh,
how we
yes.
respond to car crashes. When you're talking about
Yes.
somebody's soul life, soul death is on the line. Are you going to make it or are you not? Soul death is a real thing. If you think
Hmm.
we can't prove this, I would say that just wait, because at some point you're going to be able to have this experience on your own. It's not going to happen. You don't have to wait for your body to die for your rebirthing experience to happen. That there is a process that when you put it to work and work it, it works for you, and it's free. It doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
And when we're done with this, it is very empowering and it will wreck a lot of the existing structures that we have, that we depend on, that we think are vital to our society and our function of corporateness and all the other things that we spin on people. But honestly,
Yeah.
I mean, you go into these super conscious states, you know where intelligence comes from. Now, when we can teach our kids where to tap into their intelligence, where the distortions are
Yeah.
coming from, how you wipe that out, you'd see a completely different society. And it really wouldn't take that long. But
Yeah.
the stigma is there, and the stigma is very active. The stigma is very powerful, and the stigma is still being promoted very actively by the AMA or APA squared to both of those people. We'll talk about a handful of people that are not doing that in a couple episodes, but
Yeah.
man, not a good
Yeah.
thing right now.
No, that's why dispelling it and giving people, helping to build the alternatives and giving people a different frame of reference, like what we've gone through, and how to use that in a positive way. Being able to help build that is beyond necessary. And
Yeah,
I definitely know that we're part of the change that is necessary.
I agree.
And for that, I'm truly grateful. Because this has been a lot of these false constructs and these false prophets,
Yeah.
both ways,
Here
have needed to fail for a long time.
and here in Appalachia, there's a prophecy that there's going to be a revision to Christianity that'll bring 1 billion people into the practice. And if it's the practice that you and I are talking about with the kind of integrated results that you and I are talking about, I can absolutely see that happen. I see that happening.
Yeah,
It would be more than 1 billion people. You would have a whole lot of people rushing into this. We'd be dealing with the biggest problem would be the number of people wanting to experience it and trying to get them through logistically and dealing with all those issues, which is, a lot. So I think we have a lot to look forward to. But I think
oh
it's
yeah,
imperative that we take this toxic psychiatry, get it out of the courtrooms, and if they can't learn to respect people's civil rights and religious expression, then get it out of medicine. It's not
yeah.
doing anyone any good. That's my
No,
feeling.
yeah, they need to be arrested. And I have to wonder, some of these folks, that may be what's going to be happening next. And I'm not
I
going to boo him. I'm
I
not
don't
going to
think it
boo
will
him.
stop until we start seeing people get charged. I really don't. I
Yeah,
mean, it's Medicare fraud. It's a whole bunch of things, and it's
that's right.
just abuse of process. I mean, the stack up goes on forever. We have gone on for an hour and
Absolutely.
15 minutes. This has been a great
Oh my goodness.
conversation. That's
Yes,
that's
absolutely. Always
fun
is.
life. All right, dear. Thank you very much once again. I'll get this all put together, and we'll get it out as soon as we can. Thank you so much. I
All
really
righty, hon.
appreciate you.
All righty, hon. Yep, you too. Thank you. It's always a pleasure and a joy just to know you and have these combos every week. It truly
Same
is.
here. It's really helpful. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week. All
All
right.
right. God bless.
Same to you. God bless you too. Bye.
Bye.